Hello. Where are you from, sir? Fantastic. And you're a Cossie Club member? Excellent. And what a wonderful venue we have here. Wonderful staff, very helpful environment. More people arriving. Okay. Okay, everybody. Welcome to the Cossie Club up here in the wonderful paradise that is Upper Hutt. We've got a great turnout tonight. My name is Emmett. I'm the treasurer of Hunting and Shooting Sports New Zealand, and we're proudly hosting this pre-election event. And we're doing this as a one of two series, really because this election is a very, very important one for hunters and shooters across New Zealand. We have had some great engagement with the ACT Party over the past 3 years, engagement with the leader, David Seymour, in particular, and that engagement led us to invite Mr. Seymour to visit our club last year. It was a great event. We had clubs from all across the region turn up, really vibrant, and we've just seen the engagement and interest in ACT policies from around this area, from our members, grow and grow. So we thought that tonight, before the election, it would be great to give you an opportunity to meet with the ACT candidates, and particularly to put your support behind the number 3 candidate on the list, who is a member of our club, who is a member of many of the other clubs in the region, and that's Nicole McKee. And we're going to hear from Nicole in a little bit. But first of all, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to, and please give a round of applause, to, he's a sole MP in Parliament on his own at the moment, but we know he's going to be joined by some fellows in the very near future. David Seymour.
Thank you very much, Emma. Well, look, thank you very much, Neil, Mr. President, for having us here with the Deer Stalkers. It's nice to be speaking with you again. Thanks to the Cossie Club, and I've just been hearing what great employers the Cossie Club have been through the last 6 months, supporting their staff, looking after people. A good example of how New Zealanders have come through this thing, despite the government not always making the decisions I would have encouraged them to make at different times. Thank you very much, Emma, for really being the conduit between this club and our party. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be here tonight to launch our policies for, first of all, fair firearm laws, and second of all, hunting and conservation. Two things, those last two things, that I think go together. Now, what I'm not going to do is give you the full sales pitch for ACT. I'm a great believer in the saying of Confucius, who said a short speech by a politician is a great mercy for an audience. But I do want to tell you a story, and it's the story of how we got here in relation to firearm laws. My own journey to be here is kind of circuitous, but it has convinced me that actually fair firearm law reform is the right thing to do and something New Zealand has to do. You see, it's fair to say that I wasn't a natural firearm person, much more of a Central Auckland MP, but I had had some experience with the Whakatane Pistol Club, and this was a result of another experience I had as a celebrity dancer. See, I said it's a circuitous route, but we'll get there. And I was invited to be the judge of the Whakatane edition of Dancing with the Stars, and there was some considerable talent on display. In fact, it got better all night because they were feeding me beautiful and delicious panhead pilsners free of charge. And much like the real show, as the season went on, the number of 10s received increased dramatically, even though there may not have been an objective improvement in dance performance. Anyhow, the next morning I had this invitation to go to the Whakatane Pistol Club. And I've got to say, and people may hopefully don't know this, but the combination of digesting panhead pilsners and hearing rounds go off half a metre from your head is not a good way to start a Sunday morning. I can tell you that much. But the better part of the experience is that they were wonderful people. They were men and women and their kids. Some of them brought a packed lunch, engaged in a hobby they loved, and doing it with an incredible, almost anal commitment to caution and safety. And so I got back on the plane back to Auckland or Wellington, and I thought that was interesting. Didn't think about it a lot more. That was about October 2018. Fast forward 7 months to our nation's tragedy in Christchurch. And I was actually about to give a speech to some unsuspecting students at the University of Canterbury. And I watched the video and read the manifesto because, like 500 other people holed up, locked down at the university campus, we were desperate to find out what was happening. At different times, we thought there might have been half a dozen active shooters, and it seemed very likely, if that was true, that a university is the kind of place they might come next. It's one of the only times in my life that I've been genuinely, rationally scared about what might happen. So that was a shock. And then, of course, a week later, I was sitting in Parliament, and the Prime Minister had said, we're going to ban every firearm used in 10 days. And I thought, this is madness. And I saw the submissions and the commentary from the Law Society, and I recognized two things. First of all, the people that were about to be subject to collective punishment were mostly people like the ones I'd met that morning in Whakatane. Not bad people, not reckless people, not people that deserved to be the subject of collective punishment for the most heinous crime in our nation's peacetime history they hadn't committed, but actually people who are about to be made the scapegoats in a deeply political and cynical manoeuvre that would not actually make New Zealanders safer, wouldn't alleviate any of the very real fear that I and so many New Zealanders had felt that day, but would divide, punish, and be hugely ineffective for actually achieving a better New Zealand. And that's when I decided that you get the privilege of a seat in Parliament, you should use it. And that's when I decided that ACT couldn't go along with these laws, and I was surprised to see that my friends in the National Party could. I thought it'll be incredible if New Zealand First go along with it, but they did. And that's how I came to be voting 1 against 119, against the most ineffective, divisive, premature laws that this government has ever passed. I say they're ineffective because if you ban about 240,000 centre-fire semi-automatics and you buy back 60,000, that's a 25% success rate. So even by the standards of the law, it hasn't been very effective. And by the way, I didn't see any gangs lining up to hand theirs in. It is divisive because the trust in the police by the very community that has sought to be the eyes and the ears of police and to pursue safety is at all-time low, according to Colfo's surveys of trust in police by licensed firearm owners. And it's premature because we need the Royal Commission to tell us what actually happened, although we can make a pretty good guess already. I think we could reasonably guess that the real problem is a foreign national, I mean, okay, an Australian, but a foreign national, arrives in New Zealand, gets a license without anybody talking to him, buys 2 AR-15s, buys 7,000 rounds on at least 2 mail orders signed off by the police. And yet this was a guy who was a single male living alone, whose travel history included the Ukraine, Pakistan, the Balkans, and North Korea. Perfectly reasonable places that I'm sure you all can't wait to get to as soon as you're allowed. Despite all of that, nobody in our system was asking, gee, that's a bit weird. Someone should talk to him, but nobody did. If they had, those people wouldn't have died and we wouldn't be here. And we wouldn't have had the poor substitute of collectively punishing another group of people who'd done nothing wrong. So I predict, and I gave a speech here about a year ago about the puck, because I lived in Canada. It's all about skating where the puck's going to be. And so far, my predictions are right, except the Royal Commission report keeps being delayed, so it's what the Prime Minister would probably call a tricky puck. But nevertheless, we are going to have a new Parliament that is going to have to confront the reality the laws we've passed have not worked, they're ineffective, divisive, they were premature, and we're going to have to start again and do it better. The other thing that's happened in that time is that I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Nicole McKee and getting her recruited to our party to be our candidate. And I know that with Nicole in Parliament, which on current polling is a near certainty, then we are going to have a genuine but also calm and rational voice for better firearm laws in this country. And I think Nicole is going to be a very substantial politician, actually across a range of issues. And that's why I'm pleased to have her here tonight to run through exactly what ACT is proposing in terms of firearm laws being made fair and also hunting and conservation. I don't think she needs any further introduction to this group. So thank you for listening, and let's get her up here. Thank you.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight. There's quite a few familiar faces that I see here, and I just want to say I appreciate your support. There's also probably a few faces out there on the internet. Kia ora. Like to say thank you as well. But there will be in this room a large number of hunters and firearm owners. But out there in the internet world, there'll be some that are not firearm owners. And I just want to be able to let people know a little bit about myself, because those who know me well and my family, but those who don't will just think of me as being that gun lady. So I'd like to put a bit of perspective into it and give you a bit of a rundown on who I am. Hi everyone, I'm Nicole McKee. I'm number 3 on the ACT party list, but I'm also a married woman. I've been married to my husband for the last 20 years. Well, actually, I've been with him for 20, married for 15. We have 4 beautiful children. I'm a small business owner. I've worked in law for 12 years, but my most important role has been as an at-home mum to my children of 4. And I'm very privileged that my husband, who's a builder, was able to support us so that I could stay home and bring up those children. During this time, my husband, the builder, decided that he wanted to be a lawyer. So he went about getting a university degree. And because he was the only one working, we had to make sure that it was affordable for us. So he would work for a year, study for a year, work for a year, study for a year. At the end of 9 years, he finally got his law degree. And I'll just put it out there, he's still a builder. But during this time, we did struggle, and we couldn't really afford to buy steak or buy meat. So Timmy, if you're watching out there on internet land, thank you so much, and also to Chris, because these are the guys that took me out hunting so that we could put meat on our table. And for a very long time, that was the only way that we had any meat, was to be able to go out there and hunt and gather. An old colleague of mine, Joelle, some of you might know her, we went for a hunt over in the Wairarapa one day, came back on our truck with 2 red deer on the back, and I said to her, "Mate, she's American, you love New Zealand. Where else in the world can you go over the hill, get yourself a couple of deer, drive past Parliament on your way back home, and then hang them up and cut them down yourselves, vacuum pack, and thank goodness for the George Foreman mincer." I lived like that 9 years, and I'm very appreciative of it. The thing is, the ACT Party are also very appreciative, not just of our ability to be able to go and hunt and gather, but for the conservation efforts that hunters give to our environment. And that has gone unnoticed in the latest round of this government over the last 3 years. It's not right. It's not right that our volunteered efforts, our donated time to game animal management has been ignored. And the ACT Party want you to know, as hunters and gatherers, that we do appreciate what you can give to our New Zealand and to the next generation of hunters. I want my children, those 4, to be able to grow up and hunt and gather if they need to. More importantly, as a small business owner, I've been delivering firearms safety education in rural and isolated communities. 3,000 people have gone through my course that I have delivered, and they are all hunters. Now, that's been ignored by the current government. But more so, we have a conservation minister who is more involved in making sure that the grass is maintained, looking at our flora and our fauna at the expense of wild game management. So much so that funding from a statutory body like the Game Animal Council has been removed, so that they are struggling to actually fulfill their statutory obligations. We insist that if we get into a position to negotiate with an incoming government, that we are able to get that funding back to that statutory body, so they can look at re-establishing a Himalayan tar plan, so that they can look at proper game animal management in conjunction with the New Zealand Deer Stalkers Association and other stakeholders, because that's where we need to be, in a consultative environment with the stakeholders and the users. And the ACT Party see that, acknowledge that. More importantly, we value it. There's a lot of things in conservation that we need to have a look at. We have touched a little bit on some of the environment issues that's in our plan, and I hope that you will go and have a look at our plan and our policies on our website, act.org.nz. But I'm going to move now into the firearms sector, because that's a big one for all firearm users and the 250,000 law-abiding people out there that have been affected by the legislation. Many of you know what's occurred. I don't want to go through and re-establish everything, because you're all quite well aware. But for those out there in the internet land, I just want to put it in a bit more perspective, especially for the non-firearm owners out there. We've had a number of legislative changes that have occurred in the last 18 months. And the last one that came through was in June this year. It's called the Arms Legislation Act 2020. Now, in that piece of legislation, we have registration. And for those that don't understand why firearm owners are against registration, let me put this into perspective for you. A recent Official Information Act request that I made of New Zealand Police, where I asked them how many firearms have been seized over the last year. The answer was 3,000. Your initial reaction is, that's great. 3,000 firearms, hopefully taken from people that don't deserve to have them, or or have held them illegally. That's great. But how many of those firearms had serial numbers on them? Only 1,500. That makes a mockery out of potential registration. Who's going to pay for the registration? Well, you are. The taxpayers. They're all going to pay for it. But is it going to keep us safe? How can it keep us safe when over half of them actually don't have serial numbers? What else is in that piece of legislation? Well, let's talk about the doctor-patient relationship. If a firearms owner is feeling like they're a little bit stressed, potential mental health issues, they're probably not going to go and see their doctor. And the reason why is because a doctor will now feel obliged to tell New Zealand Police. How can it be safe with a firearms owner seeking help or needing help, not actually going to get that help? It's a mockery again, a bad piece of legislation. What else is in there? Well, if me, as a firearms owner, if I'm charged with an offence that's punishable by more than 3 months jail, I will lose my firearms licence for 10 years. I don't actually need to be convicted, I just need to be charged. Now, there's a whole lot of other things in there that go along these lines, like I now lose my right to remain silent. You know, it actually means a patched gang member has more rights than I do, and I'm vetted every 12 months by police because I'm a pistol holder. How can that keep New Zealand safe? I'm not the problem. I'm a mum, I'm a wife, I've never been arrested, I've never been convicted. I thought I was a good citizen, but apparently I need to be watched a little bit closer. So the ACT Party is saying, wait a minute, the target has been on the firearms licensed owners, but the criminals are the ones that are out there doing all the damage. Where in this legislation are the criminals being affected? Well, they're not. So as part of our firearms policy, we're undertaking to do several things. I think the first and major thing that we need to look at is repealing the Arms Legislation Act 2020, the one that's just gone through, the one with registration, the one with doctors, the ones with all those things I just talked about. We need to repeal that. What's our chances of doing it? Well, it's better than trying to say we're going to repeal everything. We need to be realistic here. That last tranche of legislation that went through was not agreed to by all the parties. David wasn't standing there being 119 votes to 1. The National Party also went against that latest tranche of legislation. So maybe, just maybe, we'll have a chance of repealing that. But then what? Well, we need to start again. So I'm going to put it to you this way. Think of the basis of our Arms Act being the 1983 Act, which we all know about. That actually took 2 years to produce because it was done with consultation, real consultation. So think of that act like a tyre on a bicycle wheel. It's kept us going. It was built by the community and it was built by the stakeholders. But over the last 37 years, it's had a series of punctures, and we'll call them 1992 regulations, the pistol grip amendments, the air rifle amendments, the Arms Amendment Act, the Arms Legislation Act, the Orders in Council. Heck, there's been so many punches on that tyre that it's had wet bandages just slapped all over it. The integrity of the whole wheel has now been compromised. So we need to build a new wheel. And what we are suggesting is the way to go about it is to take all the good bits from the legislations that's worked, all the good bits from the 83 Act, from any of the amendments that we've had over the years, and build a whole new wheel. We're not going to do it overnight because we'd like to consult. It's a novel thing, I know. But hopefully we can get back to an era where people feel like they have had some involvement in new law. And I'd like to be a part of that change. And I'd like to do it from the inside. Because guys, really at the end of the day, we've had a lot of our freedoms taken from us. And the ACT Party is all about freedom. Freedom of choice, freedom to be, freedom of responsibility, personal responsibility. I grew up with these freedoms, and I tell you what, I took them for granted. And I think most of you here have as well. The ACT Party are all about getting those freedoms back because they've actually been the main principles of the party since it was established. And now, more than ever, we need to get back to that. I talked about gangs. what we're going to do about the gangs. Some will say we need to throw those naughty gang members in jail for longer. Well, I'm going to say to you, that's actually not going to work. I thought it was a good thing at first, but I've had a couple of people do some investigations. And here's what we came up with. When asking gang members, if you were to be sentenced for a longer period of time, how would that affect the way that you commit crime? One answer was, we would kill the victim. Because if the victim's not there to testify against us, then maybe we won't go to jail at all. And in the second lot of questioning, when we asked, what if your 5-year term turned into 15 years? The answer was, anything over 8 years, and we don't give a damn. We've already lost everything. We've lost our families, our jobs, our homes, and at the end of the day, the gangs will pay us while we're inside prison to recruit more. So how do we go about making sure that we can be effective, keep the community safe, and actually do something that will make a difference? Well, here's what we plan to put forward, should we be in that position after you've given us your party vote. What we would like to be able to do is go in there and say, hey, we actually already have an act. It's called the Criminal Proceeds Recovery Act. And for some of you who know about it and those that don't, I'll give you a quick rundown. This means that when there's an organised crime taking place, the police can go in there and say, if there's assets that value over $30,000, there's organised crime taking place where people are known criminals, then the police can look to freeze and seize assets. But those assets must be over $30,000 in value. And it's very hard for the police to figure out what's been purchased with organised crime money to the value of $30,000. So really, they try and wait till it's $100,000. And so that means that there's a lot of organised crime potentially going unnoticed and under the table. What our suggestion is that with when you hear about the police saying that they've gone into a place and they have found drugs, meth, and cash, they're also finding illegal guns. So what we would like to do is introduce that the finding of an illegal firearm in the circumstance where organised crime is taking place becomes the new threshold for freeze and seize of all assets. This will hopefully take firearms out of the criminals' hands, put the tax up for the gangs because we'll be seizing more, and it also means that the firearms community and the general public of New Zealand can feel safer because the guns are coming in and out of the gangs' hands. The reality is, as David said before, 240,000 expected prohibited firearms out there, and only 60,000 of them got handed in. Some of them will be disgruntled firearm owners, but some of them will be people who actually don't realise that they're in possession of prohibited firearms, because it's not just about the semi-automatics. It's about different types of firearms that were also banned and not made public. During the course of our transactions going around from Cape Reinga to here in Upper Hutt today, I've come across firearm owners who have asked me questions about guns that they have, not realising that they're actually prohibited firearms now. And the horrible thing is, because they're in possession of them, they could go to jail. There is no ability, they feel, for them to hand them in. Now, if we've got people sitting on prohibited firearms and they're too afraid to hand them in for going to jail, they may potentially sell them off to the gangs, and none of us want that. I do not want my children growing up in an era where they have more firearms being used by criminals against New Zealand police, against frontline police, against the public, and against them. So we have to work together, the firearms community, and the way we can start to do this is by you giving your party vote to act. So we can get in on the inside and start making some changes. Now, the reality here is, guys, is we are a small party, but we need to be bigger than just David Seymour, because that man has worked so hard to get us to where we are today, because he speaks for the minority. And it's not just the firearm owners, it's the people who are losing their property rights. It's the farmers out there as well. Everyone's starting to be affected by a domineering government who is telling us how to feel, how to think, and make sure that you're internally grateful for having that opportunity to do so. I would like to be able to continue to represent the firearm owners in Parliament, but I think it's now bigger than that. I think it's gone past just firearms legislation. We need to get a representative in there for the farmers. We need to get representative in there for the conservationists, you know, and we have a really great team of people behind us. And at the end of the day, if you're still wondering who to vote for, think about your principles. Think about the things that you were brought up with and the things you want your children to enjoy in the future. The freedom of choice, the freedom to have personal responsibility, the freedom to be you and be appreciated for it. So I'm just going to finish up my little speech there, but I'd just like to once again thank you all for your time, and let all the hunters out there know the ACT Party totally appreciate your conservation efforts on our environment. Thank you. I have great pleasure now to invite our number 2, our Deputy Leader, Brooke van Velden, up to speak to you, and hand it over.
Well, isn't she wonderful? And you know what? A party vote for ACT will get someone like Nicole in, and I think she would be a wonderful, wonderful addition to the New Zealand Parliament. She's spoken so well already about the Arms Legislation Act. So there's only one part of that that I'd like to talk about tonight, and that's the doctor-patient relationship. And I think it's really sending the wrong message, this government, about our mental health system. And we have a terrible, terrible suicide rate in our rural communities. And I think we as a society, thankfully, have started being open and started talking more about the problems that we have in mental health and addiction. But having a piece of legislation go through the House saying that a doctor, if they feel that, you know, they have a worry about their patient's mental health, should go and talk to the police if they have a firearm, means that more and more people who should be seeking help are more likely not to go and actually talk to anyone about it. And well, I'm assuming that would come up in conversation, but also the police, through the law, have a more requirement to go and talk to health practitioners as well. But there's so much more that we could be doing in the mental health space. And I don't want to see our rural communities suffering even further with a stigmatized issue. So what would the ACT Party actually do as a solution? So what we have in the current system is 20 different DHBs, and they all have different priorities and where they send their mental health funding. And so we have huge postcode lotteries. Some DHBs do quite well, some really, really don't. And what we say as the ACT Party is that everyone, if they're vulnerable, should be getting their help at their most vulnerable, and everyone should have good access to mental health care. So the $2 billion that we spend currently, that should be all funneled into one single nationwide entity, so everyone knows where they can get help when they need help. It gets away from rural communities not having access to care, because we can have more telehealth. We can have more NGOs set up in the space who actually know the communities. So we can do a lot better. And I think we really, really should, because I don't want to see our rural communities suffering with mental health and not reaching out for help. We do definitely need to do better in that area. So I would encourage you, once again, to support Nicole and support David in what they're doing in Parliament, but also look out for the mental health policy as well, because I think this is an area that the entire country really does need to focus on as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll just have some last words for the wonderful live stream audience. Hello, everybody out there in New Zealand. We've had a really good turnout on the screen. So some last words for David, and then we're going to open up to the floor.
Yeah, but thank you for watching. No, look, we've had a really good team, and what we're going to do now is do a bit of Q&A and just hear what people here from the Deerstalkers and the Hutt Valley have on their minds. And we usually stop the live stream there.